With the current unknown status of Cam Rising's health, should Isaac Wilson, or when Cam Rising does eventually return, be the starter for Utah moving forward? That's what we're going to discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, on any podcast platform as well. And we enjoy interacting with all of you in the comments, whether that's on YouTube or on social media, where you can follow our show on Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by former University of Utah kicker and recruiting expert Moose Bingham on this one. And Moose, when posing the question, should Cam Rising be the starter when he does eventually return back to 100%? Or should it be Isaac Wilson? It should 1,000% be Cam Rising. When you look at Cam Rising, he's just still clearly better than Isaac. And Isaac did, anytime you get a win with a quarterback on the road in a top 15 team's house, I think this merits a little bit of discussion, especially when we still will never truly know what's going on with Cam Rising because Kyle Whittingham does not like to divulge injuries, as we've discovered. But as we know with Cam Rising, and even from what we've seen from him this year during Isaac, I think his pocket presence is still better than Isaac. I think his accuracy is better. He still has a more wealth of knowledge. He knows when to run better. He operates better under pressure. And I just believe when he is fully healthy, because of all that experience, because of the heights he's led this Utah program to, even when Isaac has good moments, Cam Rising still clearly gives this team their best chance to win, not just in the Big 12, but even in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So the big thing with Isaac for me is the interceptions. He has 5 touchdowns, which is really impressive for someone of his age, his stature. He's still trying to force the ball a little bit. And I love that he's doing that, honestly. I love that he's taking risks. I love that he's a gunslinger. And all these Utah fans see that. But even last game, he had 207 yards, which is amazing. He had 41 rushing yards on 6 attempts. He had a touchdown, but he did have 2 interceptions. The game before at Utah State, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 239 yards. Isaac, he's exceeding every expectation I ever had for him, to be honest with you. And that's why we're having this conversation. Like, he really is. He went in against Southern Utah, and that's where 2 of his interceptions came from. Him trying to force the ball, and then he's figuring it out. He's figuring it out little by little, and I think he's getting better as we go on. And he's relying on the running game, and he's being a very typical Utah quarterback. But I love that we're having this conversation. Usually the most popular person on campus is the backup quarterback. It's like, oh, he could probably do this, and this guy doesn't do that. And that's fantastic for Isaac. He is such a phenomenal kid. He's getting better leaps and bounds every week, and he's making better decisions. But he's still going to make those freshman mistakes. He's still going to try to figure it out. And I think that Cam does a better job getting everyone involved. I mean, Cam has 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's not running as much, but when he has run, it's just a stroke of bad luck. Why do they have the Gatorade cart? What are we doing? But it's just like, that happens. One of my teammates ran into a cannon at one place. Yeah, it was crazy. And I'm like, it was when I was playing at BYU. This kid named Algie Brown ran into a cannon that was supposed to go off after each touchdown.
Like at BYU? Cannon was okay. You guys used a cannon there. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't even know there was a cannon there. And he's like, I didn't either. But weird, freaky things happen. And it seems like it always happens to Cam Rising. But this is a senior year. We have a senior class right now with everyone that's here. If you go into the roster, you're like, okay, let's look at our wide receivers. Dorian Singer, senior transfer. Money Park, senior. Darian Zipper, he's a freshman, but then Damian Alford's senior as well. Luca Calderell is a senior. Micah Pittman, he's a senior. You've got Jaron Kump, he's a senior. You've got Brant Keithy, he's a senior. You've got so many seniors. Micah Bernard, he's a senior. And so this is such a senior-heavy class. And then on the defense, Junior Tafuna, Connor O'Toole. You've got Alaki Viamahi. You've got all these guys, Karene Reed. You've got Lander Barton, who's probably going to declare for the draft. You've got Vaughn. You've got Geilman. You've got all these guys that it's a big senior class. And you're just like, okay, let's see if we can go in and we can capitalize on all these senior players we have. Over half the starters are seniors this year. And they're waiting for Cam to come back in so that they can go in and make that playoff run that they've all been dreaming of and working for.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. I mean, Kyle Whittingham said, this team has rallied around and supports Isaac Wilson. But if we also go by what Kyle Whittingham has said, Cam Rising is the leaders of leaders on this Utah team. The energy that he injects and just the lift that the players experience with Cam on the field. Just look at the Baylor difference from when Cam was on the field to when Cam's off the field. And I think some people might be listening to this and go, well, Isaac did it against Oklahoma State versus Cam did it against Baylor and Southern Utah. Well, I will say this. I do think by the time this season is over, Baylor's defense will be ranked. I actually think they already are. Baylor's defense is straight up better than Oklahoma State's. And let's not forget that 8 of the 11 drives that Cam led have ended with Utah scoring points, 7 of which were touchdowns. So hasn't always come against the best competition, but every single time Cam did his job, often which in a massive pass play, showing that it wasn't even like a challenge against the likes of a Southern Utah and some of the plays against Baylor. I even look back to a miss, right? Like the Dorian Singer one, inches away from a 50-yard touchdown pass. So yeah, we agree Cam is clearly the guy, but we don't know when he will be the guy again. Now, Kyle Whittingham did shed a little bit of light on the injury situation and said that, hey, Cam did practice last week. This came from his press conference today. Him and Isaac Wilson were rotating for the reps, but they realized Cam was a true game time decision. They realized he didn't have enough velocity on the ball, not able to spin it like he needed to, and Cam even agreed that it was probably best that he not play because Isaac was, even though they cleared Cam to play, they realized that Isaac gave Utah their best chance to win. They even rested Cam last weekend in stretches, but Isaac was the guy. They made the decision 20 to 25 minutes before the game. Hearing that, I am more understanding of why everything happened the way it did last week. Why Dorian Singer, because Cam was practicing and getting a bunch of first-team reps, felt comfortable enough to say that Cam Rising was going to play. And it sounds like they were still largely hoping that Cam could play. So I understand why it played out. I do think once we get more of the context now, I feel better about how Utah had handled it. I still wish they could have been a little bit cleaner in certain aspects, but that's what comes with a Kyle Whittingham team. They absolutely made the right move. And I'm not even, obviously it always looked better in 2020 with Isaac having gone in there and won. But even if Utah had lost, it wasn't worth throwing Cam out there when he wasn't 100%.
No, I agree with you. And the most important stat to come from that game, it's not interceptions. It's that Utah got the win. They're like, our defense is good enough to contain these guys. Our running game is good enough to dominate. And at the end of the day, a win's a win's a win. And so if you can preserve Cam for the next game, that's a huge win in and of itself. Because forcing him out there, I think his hand's cut or whatever. And with that, you don't want to open the stitches. You don't want him to be out longer. You want him to be ready to make that playoff run. And Utah set themselves up being in the Big 12 and playing the way they do, that they're going to be in contention for a Big 12 championship and a playoff run. Interestingly enough, that team down south is one that they're going to have to contend with. And I didn't see that coming either. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, the team down south is 4-0. Utah's going to have probably College game day coming to the U. And with that, who I love seeing Pat McAfee. He's a fan favorite. And the Holy War is going to be epic proportions in year one of the Big 12 is what it's shaping up to be if BYU and Utah can continue their winning ways.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now because you mentioned game day. That is Utah will have some stiff competition to get it. Absolutely in play for it. They'll have to beat out Georgia at Ole Miss. So, and that'll be tough because we know about the ESPN and SEC right now with them not choosing to go to Oklahoma State, unfortunately. We'll also have to beat out Alabama, LSU. Those are the biggest ones I'm concerned for. But, man, if BYU and Utah both keep winning, we're talking about a top 15 matchup probably. So that's where it would have a chance. And
could be a top 10.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, that's that. Ooh. I mean, BYU's done some good things like that. Are you certain they're gonna? And I want to say, like, shout out BYU. What they have done so far has been incredible. I was incredibly impressed by them at Kansas State. I would love it if Utah and BYU. This was a massive matchup when they both played. I know I'm obviously hosting Locked On Utes, and a lot of Utah fans feel a certain way about BYU, but I can really respect what the state of Utah's football programs are both doing right now. I've also mentioned before, I do think Kalani Sitake's a really good coach. How confident are you that they're going to beat Baylor this weekend?
Oh, I have no freaking clue. I thought they were going to be 2-2 going into this Baylor game.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, there's no way they're winning this game. And I'm like, they have shut out all the P4 opponents and not allowed them to score a touchdown. When you watch BYU this year, you feel like you're watching Utah. And it could be because you've got Jay Hill, Sione Poha, you've got Gary Anderson, and you've got Kalani Sitake. And you're like, seems like Kyle Whittingham's fingerprints are all over this BYU team, because they are. It's from the same tree. And Kyle has been so good for so long that he's put out great assistants, and now they're being successful all over college and NFL.
They are. I only bring up the Baylor game because it's tough to win on the road. I think that Baylor team, I know Colorado beat them. Baylor, if the players just execute at the end of the game, there's no way they lose that game. They absolutely should be a 3-1 team with their only loss to Utah. So I do think that is going to be a fun game on Saturday. Curious to see if the Cougars or Baylor Bears can pull that one out. And one of the biggest reasons that Utah is undefeated right now is the success of the defensive backfield. We heard a lot last week about what Oklahoma State, and I myself even included, thought that we thought this was going to be a higher scoring game because of the success that Oklahoma State's passing game had. But the Utah secondary, albeit the final 2 drives excluded, was exceptional. Want to talk about how the Utah secondary has been playing in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at 5-Hour Energy. Want to get in shape but having trouble staying motivated? Make 5-Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know you sometimes don't want to go to the gym. I know I do for sure after a long day of work. But you can take those 5-Hour Energy shots to give you that feeling and alertness so you can not just get to the gym, but get a great workout in. With 0 sugar and convenient portable sizes, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropic burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. You can try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12 or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your doorstep. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy products today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today and pick up some 5-Hour Energy. All right, Moose, keeping it rolling here. When you're talking about this Utah secondary, I still can't believe how much success they had. Absolutely shutting down Alan Bowman. They benched him at halftime because of how well the Utah defensive backs were playing. Utah's secondary, look, they gave up some yards against Utah State the week before. We said before that I feel like that was a lot of Bryson Barnes knowing this team well, and Utah State also has some really quality receivers that could be on a lot of Power 4 teams, right? So this Utah secondary, even last year, right, the run defense is top 5, the secondary was not. When Utah's lost a lot of their big road games, it's been because they're playing NFL caliber quarterbacks. Bo Nix, Michael Penix. So you look at the level of throws that's required to beat this Utah secondary. You got to be able to execute at a high level. Alan Bowman was not. So Utah ended up holding Oklahoma State to just 156 total yards through 3 quarters, and only 120 of those were through the air. Now, give Oklahoma State credit, right? In the 4th quarter, did have 117 yards, made some of those throws and plays look easy. But for the majority of the game, Smith Snowden, Elijah Davis, also going along with Teo Johnson, of course, Zamaya Vaughn, Cameron Calhoun, and Alakai Gilman, another one, were absolutely lights out.
You're absolutely right.
Thank
you. You see, defensive backs, their success is predicated on the pressure given by the linebackers and the D-line. And so if your linebackers and D-linemen can get pressure on the quarterback, your job as a defensive back is easy. If they're not getting pressure, you're in trouble. And so Utah, they play off each other. You have great defensive back play because you have great edge rushers at Utah. And a lot of these guys are elite. What I like about this mix of defensive backs this year is you have some seniors. I mean, Alakai Gelman and Zamir Vaughn, or Jeremiah Vaughn, you're sitting there and you're like, these are two seniors that have been through the ringer. They've done it all. They've played a lot of football. And they're sitting there and they're like, hey, Teo, listen, I know you're a redshirt sophomore. Elijah, listen, this is what I do. Smith, listen, this is how you're going to be great. And then you have Nate Ritchie that comes in for spells and does a great job as well. So it's just a great mix of senior leadership and just the freshmen, sophomores that love to come in and are trying to prove themselves. So these DBs are stepping up huge, but they're getting the game experience under their belts and they're doing everything right. That's what I'm loving to see because they're like, I can do it in my mind. I've watched the film. Now I'm going and they're executing and they're doing really good. I'd throw out the fourth quarter just because you're not really trying to get pressure. You're mainly going into a prevent defense. There's a lot of different things that go into that fourth quarter where it's like, we just can't let them score. Where usually Utah's like, let's rip their head off. Let's go. And I feel like that was the main difference in the game for the fourth quarter. And they kind of allowed OK State to come in and do some things that we weren't used to them seeing. And I think the coaches are going to learn from that and say, okay, next time we're in this situation, let's just send the dogs and we don't need to be in a cover 8 or whatever.
It's amazing how often this happens in football in general. You look at the NFL, the Baltimore Ravens and Dallas Cowboys. The Ravens were blowing out the Cowboys, and then late in the game, Dallas's offense finally got going through the air. So it is one of those interesting tales of like, hey, you shift into a prevent, more conservative style defense, and so often you get away from what was actually working, and then you end up giving up the bigger plays. But like we said, they were absolutely remarkable. And the pressure without Connor O'Toole still got home a few times. Van Fillinger got another sack. He's top 5, if I remember off the top of my head, in the nation right now in sacks. So seeing a healthy Fillinger has been incredible. The job the Utah defensive line did, eating up the double team so the running game could not get going for Oklahoma State. And yes, there were times where an NFL throw was open against Utah defensive backs, but there were also times where there wasn't really much open because of how well they were executing on the outside. And yes, Vaughn will be gone after this year, but having Elijah Davis, Cameron Calhoun, Smith Snowden all coming back, Teo Johnson potentially could, although with the way people rave about him, and I'm so glad he wasn't ejected for targeting and just his play in general. I do think this could very well be his last year at Utah too, because there's a chance that the NFL might have eyes for his elite skill set too. But you mentioned Ritchie as well. It's just such a well-rounded defense. And what's crazy is Moose, they can get better because Karene Reed, every game I watch without Karene, and I see Encioni Votu, Jonathan Fall, Trey Reynolds, whoever it's in there, they still do good things, but they're not Karene Reed. So with Karene Reed back on this defense, with Connor O'Toole back on this defense, with the elite players they have at every level, I do think this has a chance to be one of the country's best defenses.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting to see because everyone was sold, hey, Cam's coming back, you come back too. And they kind of got together and they're like, let's get our NIL money. We're all going to be okay. And let's go ball out. And they've done it so far. And if Cam can come back and Connor can come back and Karene can come back, I mean, this is a forceful team. But we've seen injuries devastate teams. I mean, I'm looking at the high school ranks, looking at Corner Canyon, where Jerome Miles gets hurt. That's devastating. Their running back got hurt. And this last week, Helaman Kasuga got hurt. And you're just sitting there and you're like, does these teams have enough depth to overcome what's going on the injury front? And with Utah, I believe the answer is a resounding yes.
I agree. And the depth we've already shown a little bit, right? No Johnson, no Vimahi, and Utah still sits undefeated. And with Karene Reed out too. So this Utah defense is deep offense, proven they have some deep depth and creativity as well. Excited for the future of Utah. And speaking of the future, Moose, there's some really talented high school football players in the state that continue to step up. Utah recently missed out on Jerome Miles. So it's time to see what other game-changing players could be coming to the University of Utah in a short while. We're going to discuss their talents in one moment. But first, want to take an opportunity to talk with you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, and that would be our great friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet today. I'm a massive Minnesota Vikings fan, so obviously I'm loving the start that they're off to. But whatever NFL team you support, you can head over to FanDuel and check out the latest lines, odds, and action. We got MLB playoffs gearing up now here. College football is still fantastic. Speaking of college football, the spread on Utah, 12.5. Interesting, especially when you factor in such a large spread for what we originally thought was going to be a ranked game. When you remember what happened last year, I'm very interested to see if that line continues to climb, but I feel good about Utah. But whatever way you're leaning, make sure you head over to FanDuel today and get in on that $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to head over to America's #1 sportsbook. Moose, as someone, we're going to talk about high school recruiting in a second, but I don't know if you saw this, but last year with Arizona, they threw a pass with just a few seconds left in the game, and Kyle Whittingham was not happy. As someone who's worked inside of that building, and even today, Kyle Whittingham in his press conference, I was asked about the matchup and like what Kansas State did to have success. He was talking about how well Kansas State run the ball. He could not hide his smile. I think he's really excited to get the Wildcats at home this week. And from having worked with him, do you think he's forgotten what happened last year?
Oh my goodness. Kyle Whittingham, his spirit animal could be an elephant because an elephant never forgets and Kyle Whittingham never forgets either. I mean, you're just like, oh my goodness, you remember a play from 1994? He's like, yeah, this happened. And you're just like, cool, bro. But with him, he is the best competitor I've ever met. He hates losing more than he likes to win, and he loves winning. And so with him, he'll remember someone that slighted him from kindergarten. And you don't think he remembers someone that slighted him last year? Forget about it. Kyle is going to go out there, and I swear half the games he coaches, he could coach with vulgar signs on his hands for the whole game, and no one would question it because he's that competitive. And being in that program, you take on the personality of the head coach, and he does a phenomenal job of what he does.
Yeah, I think Utah's going to do a phenomenal job against Arizona. We're going to be breaking down this game on Locked On Utes all week long. But before we do, the recruiting trail is always in action during high school football season. Kyle Whittingham wanted to check some out himself. He flew on a helicopter to the Skyridge game here recently. So, Moose, who are some of the top players in the state of Utah that have been stepping up for you that you think Utah is going to be gearing up to try and land here?
So it's really interesting because this class of 2025, it feels like Utah's kind of over it at this point.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys are pretty well committed. I mean,
Austin Pay's the only one, right? And he's not, I didn't see 24/7 was not projecting him to Utah last I saw.
Yeah, Austin Pay, Utah, it's interesting because a lot of these guys, they're like, you can go to another place like Nusi Tamalopeu. They're like, you can go to Stanford. We don't care. Carson Kafusi, he's committed there. Cyrus Polu, like the guys they're getting from the state of Utah, I'm like, I would take that guy. I would take that guy. I would take that guy. And they're very choosy when it comes to the class of 2025. But the class of 2026, I mean, you've got to get Brock Harris. Isun Taufa is a musket. Celeste Moa, freak athlete. And Ami Mawala just committed to USC, which I thought was very interesting. Batmui Tola, that kid is the most disruptive D lineman I've seen since Starlo Tulele. And you're just like, this kid is crazy good. The Pula twins. If you're sad about missing on Jerome, next year's class has Jerome ×2. And they're twins, and they live in Harriman. And you're just like, let's get them. Ten Kava'a, quarterback out of Orem. Isa Nalier. I mean, Keo Akana, Devon Ika. Ifo Peely Jr., PJ Taki. Just looking at this list, I get giddy because I'm so excited. Brighton Niu just got an offer from OK State. And you're like, oh, is this a kid you really want or not? Let's see what you're going to do. When Kyle went and visited Skyridge, he wanted to see some of the guys they have on O-line, but you get to see that they've got Malachi Benjamin, 6'6", 305. And you're just like, oh, this junior could be special. And you see all of these guys where you're just like, okay, let's get going. And that's what's exciting. The class of 26 will make or break Utah's future.
It will. It feels like it has the potential to be a game changer or just an opportunity for Utah to continue to have success against, well, I was going to say all the other schools in Utah, but obviously just BYU is the one they're mainly vying for the in-state recruiting.
We could have a Pac-12 school here soon.
Hey, that's right. Everything going on with Utah State. You never know when maybe the Pac-12 will get back up to their glory days. I think it'll take a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see. Last thing on recruiting. So Helaman Kasuga is going to he named his finalists in top 8 schools: Auburn, Arizona, BYU, Nebraska, Texas A&M, USC, Utah, Washington. With the way Wilson has played and getting Wyatt Becker, do you think this is one that Utah, and he's a 4-star quarterback, Kasuga, the quarterback at Corner Canyon, do you think this is one that Utah would be really important for them to land? Or is this one that, look, with the way he burst on the scene early on, I felt like it was always going to be tough for Utah to land Kasuga?
Well, here's the thing with Helaman. He loves being close to home, and he is originally from Hawaii, but his whole family's here now. And so with him, it could be a Zach Wilson situation where it's like, it's so important to get him, not just getting him and making sure other teams don't have him. I mean, if Utah didn't get Isaac this year, how would their team be? Because last year, it wasn't like Isaac wasn't the most important recruit for them. But all of a sudden, you're just like, Isaac is the most important recruit for them because he's started 2 games for you already. With quarterbacks, you never know how it's going to be. Wyatt Becker and Isaac could transfer. And then you have Helaman, and you've got a 4-star ready to go that's proved his worth, that's beat IMG toe-to-toe against the best players in the country, and he has that experience. So I would always, always go after your top quarterbacks every single class and let them battle it out and let the cream rise to the top.
Moose, that was a fantastic breakdown of high school football in the state of Utah. If people want to learn more about prep football in the state of Utah, where should they head over to?
Well, I've got the Utah Preps podcast. If you're interested in recruiting, you can always go to Recruiting for Parents. We've got a free course that's coming out. So you can go in and understand how to help your kid from freshman all the way to when they're in college. And we actually helped out a kid this last week that was really, really big, and he ended up getting an opportunity to play at the P4 level. And so it's exciting to see. But yeah, every week we've got the Utah Preps podcast, always exciting stuff. I mean, this week alone, I was just going through some of the numbers. Listen to this. Dylan Curtis, a kicker for this class at Murray, was 6 for 6 on field goals with 20 points. Fletty Yongi, a running back at Orem, 5 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 3 rushing, 1 kickoff return. We had a kid at Provo that had 5 sacks. We had a kid at Harriman, 3 interceptions. We had a kid at Judge that had 2 interceptions, 2 returned for a touchdown. And Jack Clark from Skyview had 7 touchdowns and almost 500 total yards.
You get some great players and performers across the state of Utah. I know you're happy because you got to shout out a kicker in that as well. So, Moose, I appreciate you.
I am.
Yeah. Also, you guys can listen to him every Friday as the part of KSL Sports Rewind high school coverage. Moose, thank you for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. But tomorrow, we're going to hit on a little bit of recruiting. We're going to talk some Jerome Miles and have a feeling you're going to be seeing a familiar face on from this show on tomorrow's episode as well. And it's not just my own. Moose will be back with me then, but we appreciate all of you for checking out today's episode of Locked On Utes. Still got to preview the Arizona. A lot to look forward to on Locked On Utes.